We are in Orlah, Perek Bet, Mishnah Yud Aleph, the 11th Mishnah in the second chapter of Orlah. Okay, we're going to talk about an interesting case. I have dough, and it takes a certain amount of quantity in order to make the dough rise. Okay? Now, let's say, the Mishnah wants to know, let's say the amount of quantity it would require to make the dough rise is a teaspoon. Okay? And this is a half a teaspoon. This one is a half a teaspoon. I have a half a teaspoon of isur, and if I put this in the dough would not rise. I have a half a teaspoon of chulin, of heter, and if I put the heter in the dough would not rise on its own. But if I took the half a teaspoon of isur and put it with a half a teaspoon of heter, then the dough would rise. Let's take that back. Okay? So the question is, if the isur was necessary in combination with the heter in order to make it rise, would that make the dough asur? Because we know if this is not enough, this is a half a teaspoon or a quarter of a teaspoon. If I have a teeny amount of yeast, right? It looks like yeast, and I stuck it in the dough, it would be batal because you wouldn't know it was there at all. But now that I combined it with the isur, with the heter, does that now make it more powerful? Does that make it now enough to make the dough itself rise? That's the subject of a machloket in our Mishnah. It says the Mishnah. So or shel chulin v'shel Terumah. This is exactly our case. I call it starter, but it could even be yeast, whatever. Of chulin and of Terumah, shenaflu l'toch isa, v'lo bezeh kedei lechametz, v'lo bezeh kedei lechametz. So that's exactly the case that we just discussed. Okay, I have yeast of chulin and yeast of Terumah, and neither one is enough to make the dough rise. But both of them fell in. Or first the chulin fell in, and then the Terumah fell in, and now there's enough to make it rise. Let's go back, okay? Says the Mishnah, nitztarfu v'chimsu. And now they were combined, and then they caused chametz, they caused the dough to rise. Rabbi Lezer says, acharon aniba. Okay, I follow the last one. Whichever one came last, that's what happened. So says Rabbi Lezer, if, let's say, the Terumah fell in, okay, now it's batel. And now the second one fell in. Oh, now it has enough to rise, so the one that made enough to rise is chulin, so the whole thing is chulin. Whereas if I put in the chulin first, it won't rise. Now I add in the Terumah is now what made the dough rise. Okay, so therefore, the dough now has the status of Terumah. Okay, that's what acharon aniba. V'chachamim say, no. Ben shenafal isur batchila, ben basov. It doesn't matter whether the isur fell in originally or whether it fell in the end. It doesn't matter that the fact that there was originally that I put in the chulin yeast into the dough, that's insignificant because on its own, this Terumah yeast is not enough to make the dough rise. Since the Terumah yeast, according to Chacham, is not enough on its own, therefore the fact that there's already yeast in it and it combines to make it rise, that's not enough, and therefore this is not enough yeast to make this dough into Terumah, into meduma. Okay? Now, of these two opinions, who is more obvious and who's more interesting? Do we follow Rabbi Lezer that says achar when we follow the last one? Or do we really understand the logic of the Chachamim that say, no, it has to be eino oser ad sheyeh bo kedei lechametz? There's one more thing I want to point out. I don't have the answer. It's an interesting question. The Terumah quotes the Gemara in, where is it? The Gemara in Psachim. Okay? The Gemara in Psachim says the following. The Gemara reads this Mishnah in the following way. Reads our Mishnah and says, the Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is not what we necessarily think. Rabbi Eliezer says, the Mishnah says, hi Rabbi Eliezer, the Gemara says. Which Rabbi Eliezer are we talking about? You can read the Gemara if you want. It's Psachim Chafav Amabed. Ilay Rabbi Eliezer de Seor. What's Rabbi Eliezer opinion in Seor? Okay, did not. We learned. Seor, this is our Mishnah. Seor shel chulim b'shel Terumah shenaflu l'toch isa. I want to make this a little bigger. Okay? Here we are. Seor of chulin and of Terumah. Let's move it over. Okay? Shenaflu l'toch isa. V'ein bezeh kedei lahachmitz. V'ein bezeh kedei lahachmitz. Neither one has enough to make it rise on its own. V'nitztarfu v'chimsu. And then they're combined. Rabbi Lezer Omer, this is our Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer says, acharon aniba. You follow whatever came last. V'chachamim omrim, ben shenafal isur l'chachila, or ben shenafal isur l'besof, lo'olam eino oser. It's not oser. Make this one bigger. Here we are. It's not oser. Ad k'dei sheyeh bo k'dei lahachmitz. V'amar Abai said, that's our Mishnah. Abai said, lo shanu ela shekadam v'silek et ha'isur. Rabbi Eliezer, who said that we go after the last one, meaning Meaning, if I put in, go back to our picture, I put in Isur first, and then I put in Heter. Okay, we follow the last one. That's only Shekidem Vesilek et Isur. I took out the Isur somehow. When I dumped in the Isur first, and I was like, oh, I made a mistake, take that out. Dumped in, I put in the Isur. Then I put in the Heter, and it's like sitting there, and I said, oh, get rid of it, get it out of there. Somehow I'm able to get it out. That's what Abayi said. Avalo kadam vesilek et Isur, but if you don't remove the Isur, Asur. Even Rabbi Eliezer would agree that it's Asur. Alma, so we see from here, Ze v'ze gorem. This is a very important halacha concept. Ze v'ze gorem. Even Rabbi Eliezer agrees that if the case of when they're both together, Ze v'ze gorem, they work together, and each one works in tandem, and even if I put the Isur first and the Heter second, if the Isur is still there, they work in tandem and Ze v'ze gorem. Let's go back to our Mishnah. We'll see it in the Mishnah in the Bar Terumah. The Bar Terumah says, Achar Haniba. Okay, he says, V'had Shari Rabbi Lezer. That Rabbi Lezer says is mutar, is permitted. Kishanafal otoshel chulin achron, when the chulin fell last. Hainu davka kishakadam v'silek et isur. That's only when you came and said v'silek and removed the isur. V'afapi, even though, okay, he says, even though, this is what Rashi says, he's quoting Rashi on Psachin. Ho'il k'tzat, shesiyeh ha'achron deheter ligmor achimutz, right? The original, the yeast that you put in that was asur helped a little bit. Nonetheless, nitbatel ta'amo, its tam is batel, ve'eno chozer v'neor. This is a halachic term that we'll see maybe later on in Isur v'heter. Chozer v'neor. It doesn't go, and linaer means it doesn't wake up the Isur, meaning since I removed it, it's batel and it doesn't wake up again. Avaloka then Isur, but if you didn't remove the Isur, v'nitchames ayudei shneim, and they're both combined, asur. Why? The Savra Eliezer, ze v'ze gorem asur. His opinion is ze v'ze gorem. When I have two factors, when this comes together with that, when they're coming together, and independently each one would not maybe enough to make a chametz, but there's an isur that's necessary, that's asur. That's ze v'ze gorem. That's what we see here, ze v'ze gorem. On the other hand, Chachamim say the following: doesn't matter which one fell. Le'olam eino oser ad she'ebo kedei lechametz. It's not asur unless it has enough to make it chametz. Why? Because the Chachamim say, the Bar Terumah says, ze v'ze gorem mutar. When I have two elements and each one is combining, one is asur and one is mutar, and each one is not enough, that's ze v'ze gorem. Okay, that's ze v'ze gorem, and the Chachamim say. So we say ze v'ze gorem. Rabbi Eliezer says asur, and the Chachamim say mutar. And according to the Bar Terumah, halachak Chachamim. All right, we'll stop here. If you have any comments or questions, email me at artspoter@gmail.com. Well, let's see if I can scroll up. We'll dedicate our learning to the memory of my father, Rav Simcha ben Yitzchak Kalman. Have a great day.